Today is Thursday, October 20th, 2016. This interview is taking place in the family parlor of the Henry DeLand House Museum, a project of the West Volusia Historical Society in DeLand, Florida. My name is Hilda McCarter Johnston, a volunteer for the Historical Society and a resident of West Volusia since 1995. It is my pleasure to introduce the Honorable Edwin P.B. Sanders, a resident of DeLand since 1948. Born in 1940 in Madisonville, Kentucky, Judge Sanders and his family moved to this area after World War II. Judge Sanders served from 1982 to 2015 as Circuit Judge of the 7th Circuit of a 4-county area of Florida, including Volusia. Since retirement, he sits as Senior Judge, called on to fill in when the docket gets overloaded. In this interview, we will hear Judge Sanders talk of his life in DeLand, his memories of the way it used to be and how his family settled here and remains a part of its growth and lifestyle. Good morning, Judge Sanders.
Good morning, Hilda. Let me just make one little correction that I picked up.
Okay.
I actually retired in 2005, so I've been a senior judge for quite a long time.
Thank you. That's worth correcting.
And thank you for inviting me to come and share my experiences here in DeLand since moving here in 1948. It was a great move for us. My family moved me here. I was in the 3rd grade that year with a teacher called Ms. Gardner up at Wisconsin Avenue School. And it's been a great experience. I'm so glad that we moved here.
Well, please continue now with some of the glimpses of your memories into early life in DeLand.
Well, let me tell you just a little bit about my family. I married Kathy Walker, who was a DeLand native. She grew up, her father owned a lumber company and hardware here in DeLand called Walker Building Materials. The funny part was that other than seeing her one time when I visited her brother, who was several years older than her, she was in diapers and I was the Boy Scout leader for her when he was a Cub Scout, I guess. And I saw her then, but I never saw her again until I was in law school, and she was in University of South Florida. They had a St. Petersburg campus for freshmen, and that's where I actually met her and got to know her, and about a year and a half later we were married.
It was meant to be.
I guess.
Okay. You want to tell more about those early days? Or?
I have one sibling, my sister, who's 6 years older than I am. She lived in St. Pete for like 40 years and now lives in Sun City, which is a retirement community over there. And I have 2 children, Chris and Carrie. Chris and Stephanie, who met in law school at Stetson Law School also, got married, and they have 3 children, Charlie, Wesley, and Smith. And my daughter, Carrie, spent 6 years in London, actually, so she was late getting married. She didn't marry until after she came back from that trip over there and from working over there. Actually became a citizen of UK, a joint citizen, or dual citizen, I think they call it. And she's also in St. Petersburg. So my whole family somehow ended up down there in St. Petersburg. They have 2 children, Beckett and Henry, who was born on the 8th of the month, so we call him King Henry VIII. But let's see, my wife, I told you my wife, is there any more to tell you?
Well,
she was actually born here in DeLand.
Okay, a real native.
Yep, she truly is a native. We only live a block and a half from where she grew up.
Oh, that's interesting. Well, I thought the story of how your family, your parents got to Florida was interesting.
Well, my parents planned on having 3 children, and so I was the second. When I was born, the doctor said, okay, Jane, no more. You're too frail. You don't need to be having another child. And so that's how I ended up with 4 names. They used up all the remaining names of all the relatives. But my father took the doctor's advice, and he owned a newspaper there in Carrollton, Kentucky. He put it on the market like almost the next day, and he had operated that all through the Second World War, and they were both really exhausted. You couldn't, all the young people had gone to war, couldn't get any employees, but most of his employees were in their upper 60s or lower 70s. So he had a fraternity brother named John Perry who owned the DeLand Sun-News and 12 or 14 other newspapers in Florida. So that's how we happened to come to DeLand. He really wanted to buy DeLand Sun-News, but John Perry wouldn't sell it. Mm-hmm. So he ended up working for him for a couple of years, and then opened his own printing equipment supply business, operated throughout the state. Mm-hmm. That's how we got here.
And you were in the third grade?
I was in the third grade. We actually lived right up on the corner here, Wisconsin and Clara. We rented it from Judge Peacock, who decided to move out to his groves in a little summer house they had out there at his orange grove. And so I went to Wisconsin Avenue School. It's only a block and a half away. So I walked or rode my bicycle, I guess, every day. But everybody did in DeLand. All the kids rode their bicycles to school unless they were from too far out of town to ride. And then after 2 years, we bought a home over on the other side of town. So then I went to Boston Avenue School over there for 5th and 6th grade. Still rode bicycle every day, unless it was raining.
Mm-hmm. And those days there was junior high school, right?
Yes, when you finished elementary school, at DeLand Junior High School and DeLand Senior High School. Mm-hmm. They were both up there on Rich Avenue. And somehow a student tried to burn the high school down one time, and all they did was burn a big hole in the floor right inside the front door. But a few years later, one of them was successful, and they burned the whole school to the ground.
I hadn't heard that story.
Yeah, it burned to the ground. And then that's when they built a new high school out in the other area. They may have moved into the new high school before the fire. I can't remember for sure.
Then you said you went away to college to start with?
Yeah, I went to Transylvania College in Lexington, Kentucky. My parents were still kind of rooted into Kentucky at that point in time, and they wanted me to go back to the bluegrass and go to college. So I went there for a couple of years. But I decided that I wanted to volunteer for the draft to go into the military and get that out of the way, because things were really getting hot over there, and I wanted to go ahead and get it over with.
That was Vietnam.
I didn't want Vietnam hanging over my head. So I did. I came home, volunteered for the draft, and they took me like 20 days later and sent me to Fort Jackson for infantry training, and then Fort Hood, Texas for advanced infantry training, and then sent me to Germany for 18 months. I enjoyed Germany. It was great.
It's a good experience.
It was a great experience, and enjoyed it. I didn't enjoy the Army.
Yeah, okay.
That's too much regimentation for me. But I did enjoy Germany. It was fun, and learned quite a bit of German while I was there, which I've forgotten. But then came back, I guess, in June of '62. And then went to Stetson for my last 2 years and finished up at Stetson.
Wait, I found it interesting that you told me the original Stetson Law School was here at the airport.
Yes, it actually had been in DeLand. I think it was, I'm guessing it was 1963 when they moved it to, I can't remember for sure, but I do remember that Judge Bunky Blunt, that many, many people from DeLand here knew very well. A famous guy. The kids loved him. He was the key club advisor at the high school from Kiwanis Club for years, 20 years, I guess. So all the kids knew him. Everybody waved to him at the ball games. And that was, now I lost my train of thought.
Well, to go on with Stetson and the law school.
Yeah, the law school moved to St. Petersburg. The city went and bought it, or else I think the county owned it. I think they'd taken it for taxes. It was an old hotel, which had been very popular when people from the north would come down and spend the winter here. And it had operated for years that way, but then, well, I say years, not too many years actually, and then I guess a recession hit, and I think it went for taxes. So it had been closed for several years, and the city wanted to get it open again and going. So they offered it to Stetson if they would move the law school there, and they did.
Well, I've known it was there all along, but I never questioned how it got there.
Yeah, most people never knew that it was here, but it's actually out in the airport, and it was in the old Navy barracks out there when the war was over. Stetson also was able to secure one of the old bachelor officers' quarters there, and they moved it in here to Minnesota Avenue, and that was the original. I say original. That was the business school when I was going there. I graduated in '65. It was still the business school there. I guess they got it in about 1947 or 48. So that was the business school until I guess Winn-Dixie, Davis, the CEO, Winn-Dixie made a big gift, and they got their new business school. Now it's moved into the old First Federal Mid-Florida building on the boulevard. Yeah, beautiful business school.
Well, just in the time I've been in DeLand, I see so many changes, but you shared with me some of the things that you remember that I had no clue about, some of the businesses, where they were located, or everything was downtown.
Yeah, everything was pretty much downtown then, and most of the businesses, as I remember, it was Thursday afternoon. Let's see, the doctors stayed open on Thursday, but all the other businesses closed on Thursday afternoons. The doctor stayed open so that people could go to the doctor on that day. I think it was Thursday afternoon. That was pretty interesting. They worked, but everybody else had a half day off. Because I guess back then it was hard to get off to go to the doctor, you know. So they used that time. And you know, there are only like 4,000 people, I think, in DeLand at that time, 4,000 or 5,000 is the most. And so when you walked down the street, you knew almost everybody you passed, and everybody spoke. The men wore their straw hats, you know, they would tip them to the ladies. And it was interesting time. It was a very friendly, loving, interesting time.
Some of the businesses you mentioned that I didn't know about was the Kemp Donut Shop. We always
Kemp's. Yeah, that was really, any of the kids that were in school at that point in time would remember Kemp's. It was right across from the Baptist Church, right on the corner of Church Street and the Boulevard. And Kemp would make the donuts right in the front window, and then they'd put them up on the racks right behind where he fried the donuts in a circular thing. Then he'd dip them in the sugar, put them in the racks, and then the sugar would run off down to a plate below, and it would run down the plate and a little thing that captured it at the bottom of the tray. I think he used it over and over, honestly. I'm not sure, but they were the best glazed donuts. They were most like Krispy Kreme. They were really very much like the Krispy Kreme donuts, and everybody loved them. But he made several kinds, you know, chocolate and blueberry, whatever. And he also had milkshakes. The first time I ever tasted a coffee milkshake.
Oh, yeah.
Was
there a popular movie theater that you all went to?
Well, there were two theaters, and they both were well attended. There was the Drika Theater, which was named, I guess, after Godfrey Drika. It was in the Drika building. He had Drika's store there from way back, very early in time. It's where the pennies ultimately came into there on the southeast corner of Boulevard, New York Avenue. But the Drika Theater was kind of famous because every Saturday it had a double feature Western, you know, with Roy Rogers and Lash LaRue and all of those. And you could get in there and see both movies and a cereal for $0.25. The Athens had a special thing for students, and if you paid or you bought one of these, it cost $1, I think. And you could get in, when they first started, you could get in for 9 cents to the movie. But you had to show it had a picture of you on it, you had to show your little pass. And then it went to 15 cents and then it went to a quarter. So
inflation said it.
Yeah, yeah, it was. I guess the theater was a little. The Athens was kind of a little fancier one. The kids used to joke about when you go to the Dreeke and eat 3 boards, one to prop your seat up, or 2 to prop your seat up, and 1 to beat the rats off.
Oh gosh!
But
thank goodness it wasn't the
it
one
wasn't that
restored.
bad. It wasn't that bad.
Are you pleased with the way they restored the Athens theater?
Oh yeah, yeah,
beautiful.
yeah. I was away at prep school when they restored the Athens, when they originally redid it. Now they've taken it back to what it was before, you know. But when they redid it, of course, we thought that was the nicest thing in the world, that fancy, the big circular thing, and it was great. But then people got tired of that, you know. They really wanted to go back to the old theater, and so they made that happen.
And you told me about Teen Town too, and I had never heard about that from anyone.
Yeah, it was in the downstairs floor of the Chamber of Commerce, a part of the downstairs floor of the chamber. It was right on the southwest corner of Florida and New York, right there next to where City Hall is now. And well, City Hall for years was literally right next door to that. And the fire department was in there, and the fire engines all right where Georgia Avenue dead ends into. But Teen Town was great. It was open, I think, Friday and Saturday nights, and the kids would all congregate down there. They had 2 or 3 pool tables, an area to dance, and ping pong tables, and it was just a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
In the days before television.
Oh yeah, no TV.
Yeah.
No TV.
That
Just
was a
listen
good
to
thing.
stories on the radio.
Now you also mentioned the fair, which you attended a lot, and the circus.
Every year we had a fair, and every year we had a circus. You know, and the circus moved around a little bit. Sometimes it would be at the old fairgrounds. Sometimes it would be south of where the football stadium is now, and that big lot there, which was vacant back then, except for the radio station was there, WJBS. And then sometimes, since then, out at the airport. So, but we always had the circus, and the fair originally was out on West New York Avenue. Out there where the circus wintered, one of the circuses wintered for years out there, and then the fair moved out to the fairgrounds. The county built the new fairgrounds out East New York Avenue, right, which is still there today.
Still going on,
yeah.
Yes, very popular. Now, I've heard this from other people, but you told me a little bit more about the area that is now Deltona. Well, how you remember that?
Well, we used to hunt. Deltona was just woods. There's nothing but woods out there. A few farmhouses here and there, but it was literally just, there were a lot of deer and quail, and we'd go out and hunt out there. And houses would be about a mile apart, you know. But I remember one time when I was in law school, one of the professors had driven up to Stetson in DeLand for a meeting. And when he went over the overpass there at Lake Monroe, and he saw the motel, the Deltona Inn, I guess it was, you know. The Mackle brothers built that because they wanted a place for people to stay when they flew them down to show them Deltona. And this was after Deltona had gotten started and had probably 100, 150 houses. But you couldn't see him from the road. And he rode over the bridge, and he looked down and he saw that motel, and he joked about it in our class when he got back. He said, "I got a motel there, and there's nobody there. There's no houses, there's nothing, it's just woods and a motel." And he thought that was the funniest thing. So I went up after class and said, "There's really about 100 houses back there, you know." But it happened very quickly, and Deltona started from nothing. You know, but it was a Mackle Brothers development. But it expanded and grew. Now it's the biggest city in the county. It's bigger than Daytona Beach. I mean, it's hard to believe, but they got almost 100,000 people, maybe a little over 100,000 people there now.
Weren't there other Mackle Brothers developments around the state?
Yeah, if the name of the city starts with the word port, it's probably a Mackle development. Port St. Lucie, Port Charlotte, those were all Mackle developments.
Okay.
I don't know, they just love to start the name with port.
Except Deltona.
But they didn't do it with Deltona because it was such a great name. They put Daytona and DeLand together and call it Deltona. Yeah, it was very successful for them too. It's probably the most successful of all their developments.
Well, it is really broad.
I don't think they even really thought it'd ever go to 100,000 people.
Well, you spoke with a lot of pride about your family. Any more you want to share about your children, grandchildren?
Well, let's see. My son is an attorney. He met his wife in law school as I met mine. And they got married. They practice law down there out of the same building. They have different areas they practice in, but they practice out of the building that they bought. And I have 3 grandsons with them, Charlie, Wesley, and Smith. They both practice and enjoy practice of law down there in St. Petersburg. My daughter, and she was, as I told you before, she was over in Europe, in England for 6 years, so she was kind of late getting married, so her children are much younger. But she came back and met her husband down in St. Petersburg, which was the home office of the company she worked for. And they got married. They now have 2 children there. And they only live about 12 or 14 blocks apart, actually. My sister also lived there, and she only lived about 12 or 14 blocks from them. So it was, all my family was down there in St. Petersburg. So we made a lot of trips. Still do.
Certainly did, yeah.
And still do.
Well, with so many practicing attorneys in the family, have you seen changes in how getting to be an attorney has changed? Or?
Yeah, really, you used to didn't have, you had diploma privileges, they called it, if you graduated from a Florida law school. So you didn't have to take the bar. You only had to take it if you came in from out of state or went to law school out of state. They did away with those about the time school moved down to St. Petersburg and became where you had to take the bar. When I took the bar in 1968, I guess June of 1968, I took the bar. And we took it in Miami. I think they said there was 560 or 540 people taking the exam at that time, and it was the way biggest group taking the exam that they'd ever had in Florida. So it was becoming a popular profession, I guess I should say. Now it's up to, I don't know how many, 2,000 to 3,000 taking it now.
Every year or twice a year?
Back then, I think they only did it once a year back then. I think they may do it twice a year now. Twice, maybe 3 times, I'm not sure. But back then it was all essay. It was 20 hours of essay questions. 8 hours on Monday, 8 hours on Tuesday, and 4 hours on Wednesday. But they were all essay questions except 4. That was practice and procedure. Those were multiple choice. So there were 16 essay questions, and they had to grade all those papers. So, 500 pages with 16 essay questions. It took 6 months to grade them all. So that's why I didn't start practicing until December. It took from June to December to get them all graded and get the word out to everybody.
Long procedure. I
can
understand.
It was.
I can understand. So all of your active life here in the legal profession was here in DeLand.
Yeah, I practiced for 15 years here in DeLand, then became a judge. I was appointed judge by the governor when one of the attorneys in Daytona Beach decided he wanted to resign and start a mediation firm, which mediation became very popular then. And so I put my application in along with probably 40 or 50 other people, and I was fortunate enough that the governor selected me to be appointed. I got appointed in 1983, June the 10th of 1983, and stayed a judge for until I retired in 2005, and I'm still a judge actually because I'm what they call a senior judge. Doesn't mean you're senior to anybody, it just means you're old and retired, but still qualified to come back and sit to fill in for a judge that's sick or on vacation or when, like the foreclosure crisis, when we had so many foreclosures, the judges couldn't handle them all. So I worked 3 or 4 days a week then for 2 or 3 years, and did nothing but foreclosure cases.
Are there changes in how DeLand has spread that you like, or things you don't like about how it's grown out of its city limits that were very small at one time?
Well, I think everybody loves a small town. Almost everybody, people in New York don't. But DeLand, I mean, everything's going to grow because the population's just growing so fast. I don't have a real problem with that. There's no sense having a problem with it because it's going to happen anyway.
If you're not in control.
But the county has done a relatively good job of trying to keep the quality of the construction and the development at a fairly high level. Have a lot of screaming and yelling about it, but they've done a pretty decent job. I hate to admit that.
Yeah. Well, no, they would like to hear that.
Yeah, they have done. They've done a pretty good job.
Well, I was interested, as so many young boys, you did have a paper route when you started.
Yes, I did.
That was
I was in school, so my parents wouldn't let me. It was morning paper. It was the Jacksonville, Florida Times-Union out of Jacksonville. And we delivered it at like 6:30 in the morning. So I had to get up at like 6 and ride my bicycle down and roll my newspapers and then deliver them. I'd get home about, I guess, 8:30, something like that. I made $7.20 a week.
Amazing.
Delivered it 7 days a week.
Yeah. Wow.
That was spending money. When you got into the movies for a quarter, you know. So
wealthy young
man. You could see a lot of movies.
That's right. That's right. So your parents stayed here in DeLand until their deaths?
Yep, they stayed here and for the rest of their lives. Mm-hmm. My dad died first. He died at age 69. He was a smoker. My mother was healthier in her later years than she was in her earlier years, and she lived to be 95 and a half. Yeah. So I actually did everything for my mother for 20 years after my dad died. I paid the bills. I visited her every day. Even when she went into a nursing home, I was there every day and visited her. And funny thing, Judge Blunt was in the same situation. You know, he went every day to visit his mom. So we would talk about our daily visits.
Yeah, you know. Who would believe that when you started your young life together, you would end up like that?
Isn't that funny? Yeah. Isn't that?
That's something. Well, you've told me a lot, and I know your family will be intrigued by all of this, as well as the people who see this interview.
Well, that would be great. I'm glad to share it with anyone, you know. But I would maybe mention there were only 2 banks in town.
Oh, sure.
There was Barnett Bank and Florida Bank. Florida Bank had been in Orange City, but when the Depression hit, I think the bank closed for a while and then reopened or moved to DeLand at that point in time, Barnett Bank. And then the time came that one fellow who had lived in Tallahassee and apparently worked with the government up there, and not for the government, but with the government, and he came down and said he was going to apply for a new bank in DeLand, which he was going to call DeLand State Bank, and everybody laughed. And the officers at Barnett went, "Oh, good luck with that," you know. But apparently his politics were better than Barnett Bank's politics, because he did get the new charter. That was about 1963 or 64, right in there. And he got the bank. And so they wanted to get in business as quick as possible, because they were fearful that they might lose their charter if they didn't, you know. So they actually bought a trailer and put it there where the Sun Bank is now, the Sun Trust is, on New York Avenue. And they put a big trailer on there, and they operated out of that mobile home for until they could get the bank built, which took about 9 months, I guess, to do, 9 or 10 months.
Well, that very imposing building right on Woodland was a bank. Do you remember, with the big columns?
Well, there are 2. One was Florida Bank that was on Indiana and the Boulevard. And the other was the Barnett Bank, which was 4 stories, I think.
Oh, it's the one there on Indiana, I'm thinking.
On New York Avenue. And it's now was Baumgartner Realty, I think, now, and then has offices upstairs. But there were doctors' offices upstairs there, as there were in the Penny's building across the street. And Penny's had the bottom floor, which was Penny's store.
J.C. Penney.
J.C. Penney. Under that was the bargain basement. When you go down and they'd have their sales stuff down there, and at Christmas it'd be loaded with Christmas stuff and all that. But above that, 2 or 3 floors, I guess, and those were mostly doctors' offices. And the same in the Barnett Bank building across the street. They had elevators. There weren't many elevators around. It was people, and they had to have operators, you know, the operator do that little arm thing. That's that you go to the right and go up, go to the left and go down. Right. So that was fun just to go down and ride the elevator. You know? A lot of kids would do that.
I bet so.
I remember it was a big deal when the courthouse they put an elevator in that went 1 floor up. And kids would go ride that just to go up and down the elevator.
There are no escalators in DeLand, I guess.
No.
Yeah, nothing like that.
I don't know. Are there any now? There still aren't any, are there?
I don't think. We don't have a mall as such.
No,
That's the place you would find them. Yeah. Very nice. Well, you have been very widespread in your thoughts here, and I thank you so much. Anything else you want to add?
It's a great pleasure. I mean, I was just trying to glance quickly at a couple of notes that I wrote down, and the only thing we probably haven't discussed that I had in my notes was about the car racing.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's now become a major industry in Volusia County. Back then, it was just on the beach, and it raced down A1A, and then had a big curve that went down on the beach, and then raced back. It was about 1 mile each way, I guess, and then came back, raced back on the beach, and did the other curve back onto A1A, and the infield was just a fence. It was just a fenced-in area. So if a car ever
kind of dangerous
kept right through the fence, I used to go, and they had some grandstands, but there were only 2, one at the south end, one at the north end. And they only sat maybe 200 people in each one, so it wasn't a big deal back then. It was a big deal, I guess, for Volusia County, but nothing, I mean, it was just not even a drop to what's there now.
Oh, I know what's there.
But the cars and everybody had his driver that they followed, you know. Fireball Roberts, which one of the grandstands is named after over there. He was Fireball Roberts. He was fun because he'd always come in sliding on the beach and spinning and throwing dirt out the back of his car. I would sit right there at the northeast corner, right inside the fence, 6 inches inside the fence. God, if anyone had ever, if it had come up, they'd have wiped about 40 of us out up there. But that was fun, just sit there, and they didn't have any seats, no chairs or anything, so just sat on the ground and watched the races. But it was fun, a lot of fun. And you could see the whites of their eyes when they were.
Sure, that's scary.
A lot of fun. It's a good time. We go to DeLand Springs, and nobody had a swimming pool hardly. Just the wealthiest had a swimming pool. But we'd ride bicycles all the way out to Ponce de Leon Springs. And usually have what we call our spring and fall paths, you know, spring over the wall and fall on the ground.
Clever.
And sneak in there.
Well, now there was also Burt's Pond out there.
Burt's Park was right next to it. Now that's interesting because, you know, they now have poured concrete in that spring and stopped it up because they said it was losing too much water, and the state actually, or the federal government, I don't know exactly who arranged it, but they've actually stopped the flow of that spring and paid the owner a lot of money for the privilege of doing that. So that's no longer there. No longer there. We still have Blue Springs and what is it called? Green Springs or something like that? Gemini Springs, yeah. And Ponce de Leon Springs. Yeah.
They're very popular areas.
A lot of fun. But they used to have where the high dive was. They had a tunnel that'd go down underneath the level where the diving board came off of. We go down underneath, and they had glass windows there that you could stand there and watch the people as they entered the water from the diving board. And that was fun. We used to go down and watch. It's kind of fun to see, especially the girls.
Oh, yeah, of course. Well, now, would you have chosen that over going over to Daytona to the beach?
No, but the beach, they were both great. They were both great. And then Juniper Springs was great too. Up and go all the way up to Juniper just to get a change, But you do that on a Sunday after church. Sometimes you run up there for the rest of the day, and then usually go to the beach on Sunday also. But when you got old enough to drive, then you'd go over on Saturday,
Sure.
Saturday.
Well, now, did you have a boat so that you used the St. Johns River?
Yeah, my father loved boating and loved the water, and so we always had a boat. He had a 26-foot cabin cruiser, and we always wanted a speedboat. And my mother and father always wanted something you could sleep in.
Okay.
So, but we would go up to Silver Glen, up off Lake George there, and spend the weekend up there in the boat. That was a lot of fun. A lot of fun. And we had a lot of fun those days. It was good. It was a good life. That's why I was so glad we came to Florida. And we had everything, We had the river to fish in and go to the springs, and we had the Ocala National Forest to hunt in. We had Daytona Beach, the beach. We had the races. It was great.
Right in the middle of all that.
It was a fairyland.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you, Judge Sanders.
My pleasure.
And
thanks for inviting me.
I want to ask you if there's in one way that you would like to be remembered by your family and by those in your community.
Well, I'd like to be remembered as a good father and a good husband and a good grandfather and an honest and fair judge.
Can't ask for more than that.
No.
What is your grandfatherly name?
They call me a Pop.
Pop. Well, that's cute. Well, thank you again.
Thank you, Hilda. It was a pleasure.